glad you're here. My name is Crispina French, and I'm your host of the Rags to Riches podcast. I'm an OG textile alchemist, worked my way through art school making ragamuffins from thrift store sweaters way back in the 1980s. That college side hustle grew into a full-fledged business, and here I am to show you that you can do that too. Together, we'll navigate hurdles, challenges, and accomplishments while crafting your profitable textile upcycling business to serve you and the planet. My guests and I will cover topics including material sourcing, business savvy, product development, sales and marketing, and self-care. Overcoming struggles, celebrating wins, and reaping rewards of running your very own textile upcycling business is what we are all about. Are you ready to be inspired, energized, and supported? This is the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast. This episode of the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast is brought to you by The Unruffled. The Unruffled is a vibrant and feminine collection of slow-made garments and accessories handmade with love by Sandra Primo. Sandra is based in Austin, Texas, and every item she makes is thoughtfully constructed from finely sourced, reused textiles, favoring silks and lace and crochet. Bespoke, one of one, encouraging an infinite circle of recovery. Step into the world of The Unruffled at www.theunruffled.com. And visit the show notes page for this episode at ragstoriches.eco for links and more information. Okay, so today I have a special guest with me, Clare Herron from Clare Bare. You got to see this girl's line. It's just absolutely beautiful. She makes a line of lingerie using upcycled materials. And it's funny, we were just chatting before we started recording, and Claire was sharing. We were kind of commiserating about people's response, especially when it comes to intimate apparel, where, you know, if they don't understand the beauty of upcycling, sometimes it takes a little gentle education to kind of bring them in and make them realize that this is something that's super awesome. So welcome to Rags to Riches podcast, Claire. I'm so glad to have you with me.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Can you tell our listeners just about like what you make and what it looks like, and just give them a little kind of audible visual, if you can, describe what you do?
Yeah, so I have a sustainable lingerie brand called Clare Bare, and I use both upcycled vintage, surplus, and new sustainable materials. And my designs, I try to create things that are maybe a little more special occasion, but also wearable for every day. So I include a lot of fun details like lace-up grommets and just interesting color combinations, things that you might not typically imagine to be, an eco-friendly color palette. So I like to incorporate both neutral tones and pops of color and interesting details into my work.
It's really beautiful. Your presentation is really beautiful. I really love your inclusive sizing. I think that's just like such an integral part of making a forward thinking brand that you just kind of nail it all the way around, girl.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I think is really cool is like the look. I mean, you're using these vintage pieces and you're upcycling a lot of the material that you're using, and it's got this vintage feel to it. The styles that you're making and the even the palette, like it's like vintage with like a freshness that's just definitely worth checking out. So while we're talking about it, Clare Bare is spelled ClareBare.com. So go look at it, guys. If you're out there in the listening land of podcast listeners, ClareBare.com is where you'll see what we're talking about. And how did you get started with the upcycling aspect of what you do? Like, where did that come from in your history?
Well, I guess I could go back to the first time I ever went to a thrift store. I was probably about 7 years old, and I was in a summer theater play, and I had to find a costume for a piano performance that I had, like a little solo thing in this play. And I went to this store called Village Thrift outside of Philadelphia, where I grew up. And it just like opened my eyes to this whole new world that I never knew existed. And I found this dress that was made out of, it was handmade, and I guess it was made out of an old curtain or upholstery fabric. And it was this like beautiful green gold textured fabric. And as soon as I saw that, and I could tell that it was handmade and that someone actually created that, I guess I was inspired to do that myself. But I was still, too young to use a sewing machine. And then years later, that's just kind of what I started working with, just the materials that I had access to. And I did a lot of sewing when I was in high school. We still had home ec classes. I guess I learned that in middle school around like 7th grade. And yeah, those formative years, learning those kind of skills that I feel like maybe aren't as accessible now, since I feel like those kind of classes are cut from public education, like left and right. Yeah, just like having that early inspiration, and then the sewing skills, and then my own personal interest in creating pieces kind of led me into that direction. And it wasn't really until the end of my college education at Parsons that I really had this moment of synthesis where my passion for sewing and printing and interest in lingerie kind of combined in this printmaking class I was in. So I was using vintage fabrics as inspiration and silk screening, floral prints and things onto my own fabric. But I only had the limited size of, I think it was like a 20 by 30 screen to work with. So I had these small pieces of fabric and I didn't really know what to make with them. And I had a friend who was like, oh, you should make underwear and call it Clare Bare. And just this idea just kind of like came to life in that moment. So
isn't that cool when that happens? Like, you couldn't have planned it, right? Like, you could not, it just would not have happened any other way. That's so cool.
Yeah, like there's so many different aspects to that. My name being kind of perfect for, I guess, the brand. And I always wonder what would happen if I had a different name, like that alone just created this whole idea. So yeah, years later, I'm still doing it. But it just started as this like kind of gimmicky idea that was clever enough to like be catchy and, just kind of caught on over time.
That is such a cool story. I love it. So from Parsons to this, you're pretty established. You've been doing this for a while, and you have a really beautiful web presence. And I've learned a little bit about how you sell your work, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that. Like, so from there, like, was it a product? Were you thinking of it as like, oh, okay, now I can sell this? Or was it more just like, oh, this is really cool, I made this beautiful lingerie? And how did you get from there to like creating the business around it?
Well, right out of school, I actually worked for a public art organization. So I worked as a muralist for this organization called Groundswell, which still exists today in Brooklyn. And I did that, for a living. And then in the meantime, I was kind of creating one-off pieces, and I started an Etsy store. And that was in the early days of Etsy, when not a lot of people even knew it existed. So there were only maybe 5 people making underwear at the time on Etsy. So it caught on pretty quickly that way. And I just was making pieces here and there. I'd upload maybe like 5 pieces at a time, and then they'd sell out pretty quickly. And it was just like kind of just a fun project that I did on the side for extra income. I was always trying to like do all sorts of creative things to survive at that time. So, and I worked for that organization for about 5 years. And during that time, I guess, that was pre-social media. So it's interesting to think about that now, since we rely so heavily on that for everything. Yeah, Etsy was the outlet. So that kind of grew over time, and then slowly, as that took over all of my time, I stopped working on those other projects. And then, it took about 5 years to really, be thought of as a business, I guess, for myself. And then I just let that take over, and bartended on the side just to supplement that and to buy materials and all that. Really, it was just Etsy that got me started.
That's so cool. And again, Etsy is such a valuable tool in so many ways. Like, sometimes I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap just because of whatever. Like, there's always something wrong with you can find the negative in anything.
Oh, yeah.
But if you look for the positive, there's, I remember when I first started getting acquainted with Etsy, it was also very early on. And before that, I'd been selling wholesale to stores, and all of a sudden I had this vehicle to sell for 3.5%. Like I was, when I was selling wholesale, whoever I was selling to was doubling the price that I was giving them. So if it was $100 item, they sold it for $200. And here I could go on Etsy and sell it for $200 and only have to pay them like, $7 or whatever for their commission. And I just feel like it just opens so many doors for so many people just to test the waters. Kind of, sounds like that's kind of how you got started too,
Yeah. Yeah. It really revolutionized like the craft movement. And, it's evolved into this thing that's kind of bigger than that now. So, I have like a love-hate relationship with it. It's how I got my name out there, but now it's just kind of like anyone can sell anything on it. So it's not necessarily handmade,
right.
Because everything is technically handmade.
Right. Like what on the planet Earth wasn't created by humans somewhere along the line, right? Like,
yeah. So it feels as if they've kind of abused that. It used to be a little more precious. But there's still so many incredible things that you can find on there by independent artists and designers. So you just have to look a little bit harder now. The market's totally flooded, but it's also really awesome that so many people are doing, following their passions and creating things now.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. So now fast forward so let me just back up a little bit. So you started out to 2006-ish and then sold on Etsy, kind of augmented that with other things that you were working with or on. So then now you're kind of bi-coastal, right? You're like back and forth between like upstate New York and LA. And how are you selling now? I know that you have a couple wholesale accounts. How does that kind of fit in? And what's the kind of mix like when you're selling and retail versus wholesale? How do you establish your accounts? Like,
oh yeah, well, it's been a pretty long journey. Starting in 2006, a lot of things have changed over that time. I first started doing trade shows around 2011, I believe. And that was kind of an interesting time. It was a way to like get my name out there. Again, that was like the early days or, pre-Instagram. So those kind of outlets were necessary in order to get your name out. And I established some, accounts and a name in the industry at that time. But it wasn't really until after, I guess, 2013 is when I launched my own website. So that was clarebare.com. And I started just generating more sales, independently, just through customers discovering me that way than I was doing wholesale. So I kind of stopped focusing on the wholesale thing because, it's really great to be in stores and to have that kind of representation and, the ability for customers to discover you that way. But they do take 50%. So it's difficult for a really small brand to, keep up with that. The cost of producing and then the cost of, only making a small percentage of income based off of that. So I'm a little more selective with that now, and I don't push wholesale as much. I do love working with independent, customers. I do a lot of custom sizing, so those kind of pieces aren't available in stores. So I try to balance both.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to go. I feel like I don't know if credibility is the right word, but when you're in a store that has like this beautiful presence in whatever city, I know you're in Azaleas in New York City, and it's just like this beautiful presentation, this boutique that's like, it's well respected. So you have this like additional layer of like, the credibility is the word that comes to mind, but I think you know what I mean, where it's like, oh, okay, well, then if somebody sees you in that store, they're going to correlate you with that presence and that presentation. And I just feel like there's benefit to that even though you might not be making as much money on those orders, it kind of like gives you a level of just place, I guess, that otherwise might be hard to garner on your own without that kind of, you know, spotlighting and that kind of setting. So I feel like there's more benefit. I guess there's more benefit to being in a store than just the sale itself. I mean, I get torn about that too, because it's like, well, yeah, there might be more benefit, but like, you do need to make money. There is a bottom line that you do need to be concerned with. And, if it's not working, then it's not working. But I feel like usually there's a way to make it work. Do you feel like that? Yeah.
Yeah. And azaleas in particular, like, for me personally, it was such a goal, for me to get into that store, because my first year, I guess maybe they opened around the time that I moved to New York City, and they were right around the corner from where my first dorm was. So I'd walk down the street every day and look in the windows, and it was definitely a source of early inspiration for me. Before I was even considering designing lingerie, it was just something that I was always interested in. So it really spoke to me. And the first time I had my pieces in that store, it was just like a milestone for me. So being in certain stores, it feels like just more of a personal achievement and something to brag about,
Yeah.
But,
well, yeah, it is.
Yeah. The bulk of my income comes directly from my own website.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. And how cool that you do custom work too. So if there's, sizing that is not within that retail environment of those boutique stores, that you're able to accommodate that on your own directly with the customer that's looking for that. That's awesome. And I feel like that is such a valuable thing that a lot of not just upcycling designers, but like small, like boutique, like kind of ateliers offer customers where, yes, I can make that in whatever size you need, or, in a color that might be special for that person for some reason, where, any other kind of larger volume manufactured fashion brand of any kind is not going to be able to provide that service. And it's, it brings so much more value to the customer. So that's cool.
Yeah, it feels really good to be able to provide that for people, especially, most people, their like cup size versus their band size doesn't necessarily correlate with the standard, like small, medium, large, extra large. So, and that's an easy thing to adjust for me. So it feels good to be able to do that easily and, free of charge for people. Because, when you're mass producing, you can't really tweak things like that so easily. And that's why it's so difficult to find certain sizes.
I think also, Claire, like the thing that really like resonates with me about that is like just the human care. Like you care. You want this customer who might not be the traditional size to have the thing that makes them feel beautiful and, luxurious. It doesn't, you don't have to fit into some sort of a predisposed mold of sizing to have that accessible to you. And I feel like, when people care about what they do and what they offer, there's something of value that's transmitted that I think is hard to actually measure, right? It's just like, you're not, so that's cool.
One customer that I really love making things for is a woman who's a paraplegic. And she requested that I make custom garters to hold up her stockings for like where her legs end, she has to wear special socks, and she sits in a wheelchair. So she had me make like the adjustable sliders for the garters on the sides so that they're not pressing into her legs. And it was definitely a design challenge at first, but she's one of my repeat customers, and it feels really good. You know, you make things all day, and it's just, you know, sometimes you kind of lose touch with like why you're even doing what you're doing. And then you have a situation like that where you realize, you know, what you're doing actually is really making a difference in someone's life and making them feel really good, and providing something that's like necessary, but also, you know, kind of sexy or fun for somebody in a situation where like otherwise they might not be able to find anything that makes them feel that way.
Right. That is just beautiful. What a great story. That's really nice to, I mean, what a feeling that must be for you to just know that I mean, I can't, that's just, wow. That's awesome. How cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. You guys, if you're just tuning in, I'm speaking with Clare Herron today, and she has a company called Clare Bare, which you can find at clarebare.com. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back to learn more about how you can access her product. So hang tight. We'll be right back. Today's episode of Rags to Riches podcast is brought to you by the Stitcherhood Recycling Society, my online membership community for creative textile upcycling, recycling, and reuse entrepreneurs. Inspiration, shared experience, tutorials, business savvy, and connection to a whole posse of people who understand the passion and intricacies of running an environmentally kind, creative textile upcycling biz. Daily posts, weekly stitch hours, book recommendations, group chats, member profiles, and strong connections is what you can expect when you join Stitcherhood. Head on over to stitcherhood.crispina.eco and sign up for a free 7-day trial to see if my Stitcherhood Recycling Society is a good fit for you and your textile upcycling business. Okay, so we're back with Clare Herron from her brand Clare Bare, and we were just talking about how she's able to provide special sizing and work with customers who might have trouble finding beautiful lingerie that's super fun, super sexy, super beautifully made and created from, you know, upcycled, dead stock, vintage pieces whenever possible. So just a really great story about what your customer that you were talking about that is dealing with being a paraplegic, but also has access to your beautiful line. That's just super meaningful. How cool. Never mind the fact that it's all upcycled. And that also for me is just like something that adds so much meaning because it's just a thoughtful production model. So you've been doing this a while, right? And I just wonder, like, is there a goal or something that you think, like, if you could imagine yourself, say 2 years, maybe 3 years out, like, where do you imagine Clare Bare being? How would you like to see your brand unfolding into the future?
Yeah, it's been such a long time that I've been doing this. And then, you know, specifically the past couple of years during like the pandemic lockdowns and everything, my business blew up. And I think it was mostly because people were stuck at home and trying to make their home life feel a little bit more special. And I think lingerie kind of played into the self-care aspect of people's lives during this time. And it got to this point where I was so busy, it was like literally the only thing I was doing. It was just me and my assistant at the time, every day, just kind of churning pieces out. And yeah, it was a couple years of just nonstop production. And then in the past year, naturally, you know, when there's a boom, there's a bust. So there's been a little bit more time for me to actually think about the future because you get so caught up in the moment. Sometimes you just don't really like have the time or energy to even like think about what the next step is. So yeah, this past year I've been thinking about the future a lot, maybe for the first time in my life. I'm about to turn 40, so that's kind of a milestone of my life, and I'm thinking about the next phase. And it's never been my goal to grow to the point where I can't manage production myself. I've kind of dabbled in working with factories and had some nightmare situations. That's a whole other story. But yeah, I think after going through that, I realized I want to keep things small and precious and maybe expand into other mediums. So right now, I've been working on some stained glass pieces that are based on my lingerie pieces. So yeah, it's a couple pieces on hangers that you can hang in the window that are fabric wedged between pieces of glass. I'm doing a lot of experimentation right now. I'm trying to find, I guess, a new synthesis of, where my artwork and my design work meet. So yeah, personally, I'm trying to just experiment with my own creative projects. And then I would like to create a lot more one-of-a-kind pieces again, because I got into production mode and, mass producing in my own way, some of my own pieces. But I have so many incredible fabrics that are, I can only make one thing out of it, maybe. And I got into doing multiples or small runs more just because it's easier to do that. Shooting one piece at a time is very costly. So I don't know. I think it's like I'd like to experiment more with like higher end one of a kind pieces, while still providing, my standard pieces I've been offering for years, but just kind of go a little bit more, just elevate what I'm doing, take it to a new level.
Yeah, I feel like I've had a place in my creative journey, if you will, where I've also found myself in a place on like I want to kind of revert back to being fresh, right? Like just looking at something fresh and not like, yeah, I can produce my product till the cows come home. Be like, there's, it's almost like it almost becomes like I call it productive, like mindless productivity. It's like, I love it. I love to be like in the zone and just like creating things. But sometimes I need to have something that needs like a little puzzling. I need to figure something out. I need to like work through different kind of renditions of the idea that I have to come up with a fresh piece. And when you're busy and you're cranking out orders for, orders are coming in, you got to fill those, having that time to really just go, wait, hold on a second. I want to go put fabric between layers of glass. You don't have that. That's kind of a luxury. So to have the, the time in your days to kind of get back to that place where you're an artist, you're a maker, creator, artist who has found this balance of your kind of production work. It sounds like a really, nice place to be heading toward, to have that opportunity to make those higher end, one of a kind, super special pieces, right? Like it's cool. It's cool.
Yeah, I think that's what we all want to do, I think a lot of creative people, actually, I know because I've been talking to a lot of people, we're all kind of going through this almost like a creative renaissance type thing right now. I think the past few years changed everything for everybody, but specifically, any creative person I know is trying to diversify and pivot and go in a new direction right now. So I think it could produce some really interesting work, like collectively over the next few years. I think that we've all kind of had a moment where we questioned, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we want to move forward from this time. Everything changed. So it's only natural that I think we're all going to be moving in different directions now. So it'll be interesting to see.
I love that. I think that's so true. And I think that, as a culture, as the human race on planet Earth, I mean, I am kind of an internal optimist, but I do feel like there's a big shift. Like, you've been doing what you do for like over 15 years. And, I've been doing it a very long time as well. And just to be able like to see that there's like this cultural acceptance of upcycling and, I did a collection of completely like mine were like very utilitarian cotton underpants. They were not sexy, but they were like fun, and they were made out of recycled t-shirts, cotton t-shirts. And I remember people just being kind of flabbergasted by that. Like, oh, recycled underpants? Like, oh, so I can only imagine like how you've had to provide that kind of gentle education, that kindness, kind of maybe a little humor thrown in, because sometimes people just need that, right? Like to just get people to like stop thinking something that's not really true and like really see the whole system and understand that this is a cool thing. And I feel like the work that you and I have done over the time of our businesses is beginning to pay off. It's beginning to come around. So do you feel like that? Is it easier for you now?
Yeah. It's funny because I was saying earlier, I used to think like, oh, I don't know how people are going to receive this. Maybe I shouldn't focus so much on where the fabrics come from and just let the fabrics, the prints and things speak for themselves. But now I feel like it's so much more widely accepted, and there's so many people upcycling clothing now, and it's just it's the more the merrier. I think we all just kind of are working towards the same thing, just normalizing using what we have rather than purchasing new materials. And those have their own flaws too. There's microplastics and all these other things, you have to consider, toxic dyes, chemicals in the fabrics. And with intimate garments, they're so close to your skin and your body, and you just have to think about what you're absorbing. And
I think it's what I'm hearing is that you're really conscientious about what the fabrics that you use and how that impacts your sensibility and also the health of the planet and the people that you're selling to.
Yeah. I think the more people are upcycling clothing, just the more widely accepted it'll be.
The thing that really resonates with me about what you just said is that, we are all working together. And, that's another huge difference that I see in the textile upcycling arena compared or versus the kind of typical fashion, world, right? Where, having sold in, at the boutique shows and the clothing fashion shows in New York City over the years and in other locations as well, like it was very competitive, very fickle. People were very like cagey and weird and like didn't want you to see their stuff because, they were too busy looking at your stuff so they could like knock it off for next season or whatever. And I feel like that doesn't really happen as much, or I haven't been privy to that happening as much in the textile upcycling arena when, there's like this larger reason, there's this larger kind of passion that we all share. And that is that, we're on one planet and we're all one people. And even though, we spend a lot of time fighting with each other, really the bottom line is that, we all need to support each other and just kind of make the best of this beautiful place that we get to call home. And I feel like that's pretty clearly witnessed in the textile upcycling arena. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah. There's definitely more community than competition in the textile upcycling world. And also, I think just, the fact that we're just using what we have, everyone kind of ends up with a different result. So, it's not, this type of fashion isn't as trend-based, stylistically. I think the trend itself is upcycling, but the outcome is different for everyone. And I think the customer really appreciates having something totally unique that no one else is going to have. And it's just kind of like a win-win for everybody.
Totally. Yeah, completely agree. I think that, and that, I don't know, I just feel like, humans are so powerful. Like we have such a level of impact on our environment in so many ways. And I feel like only like the tip of the iceberg has actually been discovered. And I feel like when, people are feeling good about what they're wearing, and when people are feeling kind toward each other, when people are kind of helping each other, there's this innate kind of goodness that comes across in so many ways that are really not measurable. That's kind of where we need to be as a people on a planet that's kind of like in distress, right? Like I feel like it's people who feel good are more able to do good. And I think that when we're, able to provide that good feeling to our customers, and when we're able to like look at our body of work and say, this is something that I created from what probably would have wound up in the landfill, it sort of makes us also feel that sense of like being a solutionary. Like I just feel like we're all solutionaries, and each little thing that we do that contributes to kind of the general good and the healing of our environment has maybe more ripples than we understand.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, there's something about working with vintage upcycled materials that I feel like connects us to people from the past, and to each other just through the history of, thinking about where the fabric came from, what it was, who wore it before you did, and what was their life like. I think that fabrics, like any antique object, hold some kind of special energy from the previous owner. And I find that kind of stuff fascinating.
totally. I love that. That's so cool. So, Claire, this has been so super, like, just awesome to learn more about, like, your sort of philosophy behind your business. Your learning more about how you got started has been really super cool. I wonder if you have found yourself over the course of running your business doing things outside of like your business. Like, do you pay attention to the how much you drive your car, or what kind of food you eat, or things that might not be necessarily directly correlating to like textile upcycling, but also might have the same sort of end result as far as like nurturing yourself and being healthy and taking care of the planet?
Oh, yeah, I definitely, when it comes to food, I definitely, especially now that I spend a lot of time in upstate New York, I tried to buy local, from the local farms, and food that, makes me feel good, like cooking my own food. I definitely feel like I absorb like the nutrients in it more in a potent way. I think, yeah, just supporting local community is really important.
Yeah.
Community in general, I think, is like more important than ever. So, yeah, I try to support small, sustainable businesses, beyond fashion. I think about food, flowers, yeah, just anything that I buy, I try to buy either locally or pre-used. Like any clothing that I buy, I'll look for on like Poshmark or Depop, or any kind of used vintage stuff like eBay. Yeah, most of the things that I consume, I kind of apply the same personal code of ethics I do when I shop for materials in the world. So yeah, it definitely has infiltrated like every aspect of my life.
Me too. And it's kind of like, oh my God, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I need a 12-step program. Like, just let me throw this thing away. Right. Like,
yeah, I mean,
at the same time, it's like not happening. Like, I feel compelled to really be that conscientious. And it's, I joke about it, but it's definitely, I don't know. I feel like it's a good thing in the long run, right? Like it's just a productive way to be. And every single thing that we do, we teach by example, right? Every single piece of the beautiful lingerie that you put out into the world is offering someone an opportunity to see recycled bed sheets or vintage fabrics differently than they might have seen them before. So it's so awesome. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and just sharing your your magic and your story with me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really great talking to you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Hey, so I'm over here and I'm serving you a giant air hug because you just finished another episode of the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast. Thank you for being with me. Our music is provided by The Lucky Five. Learn more about them at thelucky5.com. Our show is produced and edited by Vandal Hyacinth. If you want to dive in deep, head over to ragstoriches.eco.